Good morning, Mr. Baring. Good morning, Mr. Reeves.
Good morning.
Mr. John Keston, shall we start with the roll call, please?
Yes. Commissioner Popkin. Here. Mr. Baring.
Here.
Mr. Hall. Here. Mr. Reeves.
Here.
Ms. Bagley. Mr. McGregor. Chair Hampton.
Present.
Vice Chair Blair.
Present. Forum. So, good morning, everyone. It is 9:02 a.m. This is the meeting of the Zoning Ordinance Advisory Committee. We have a quorum present. We will begin. We have two items, one discussion item on the docket in consideration of our calendar. Ms. May, are you presenting our item or Mr. Doss?
The item.
Yeah. So, Mr. Doss, if you wanted to read it into the record and begin with our briefing.
Sorry, you can't see me on the video if I stand over there, so
Oh, man.
I'll be here.
Nope.
So I will read the item into the record and then I'll plug in here. So consideration. This is case DCA. Item 1, case DCA 212006. Consideration of amending the Dallas Development Code, section 51A. -2.102 definitions, section 51A-4.408 maximum building height and related regulations to modify how building height is measured and how grade is established.
It's all the way on the side. Behind Ms. May on the wall. Oh, it's there.
There's one in the front. Those vans.
Good luck.
All right, I appreciate the patience. So we do have a short presentation, as noted in your case report, largely unchanged from when you met in July. At that meeting, I believe the discussion was kind of intended to, the intent was to take some time, digest the presentation and the information in the case report, and then bring it back when the time was right. So now that we finished up some of the projects, we are back. Some background information as this.
Can I pause you? We've lost video on our screen. I've got it online.
See how all it is. Hey, Mike, are you seeing my screen?
Yeah, they can see it online because I've got it up.
I can see it.
Okay. Not sure why it's not showing up here. But if everyone can see it, and yeah, everyone, Mr. Hall has a
Here.
TV. See if I can get it.
I'll get it on my phone. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it.
Sure.
I'll get it on my phone.
Okay.
I'll log in on my phone. 'Cause I can't, I don't know.
Oh, there it is.
Got it. Okay.
It said
Thank
it didn't
you.
want to be in the basement either. Yeah.
So as a kind of reminder with some background, proposed amendments originate from Building Inspections Division and Development Services, specifically from Sarah. The current code requires that applicants obtain a lot of kind of really detailed, professionally prepared grading plans with kind of Dallas specific terms and items to establish your basis point for measuring height. Those things, those requests, those additional data that's needed adds time and cost onto plan review. So the proposed amendments are intended to kind of clarify and simplify some of these measurements related to height. And so there, we just kind of grabbed some photos of homes and how homes are built up in Dallas, how lots are graded. Of course, the committee is well aware of how grading works, how we need to slope lots and all that fun stuff. So these are kind of example photos to really show how high off the ground some buildings are built. That's a big delay. So I'm going slow because there's a very large delay, and when I click go, and then that thing changes. No delay at all. So as we'll work through the proposed amendments. So as the proposed change to the definition of grade is to take out so currently the term finished ground surface elevation is contained within the definition of grade. So we're proposing that we simplify that a little bit and separate out finished ground surface elevation to be its own definition instead of being within grade. That's kind of a structural thing. And then within the definition of grade, we're proposing to align the zoning definition of grade with the building code definition of grade, which is essentially if the ground surface elevation slopes toward the structure or is flat, then you take grade as the height at the structure. If the ground surrounding the structure slopes away from the structure, building code and the proposed definition in zoning now would say that you find your average highest and lowest of the area within 6 feet of the structure. So if the structure was built up kind of on a hill, you don't just get to measure height right there at the building. You have to average your highest and lowest than 6 feet. And of course, if you're closer to the lot line than 6 feet, then you stop that 6 feet at the lot line. So, and yes, sir.
May I interrupt?
Please do.
You showed three images of houses that were built up a bit. What's the reason for them being built up? Just very briefly.
Well, the first picture we had with the Pier and Beam Foundation, obviously that was just how it's popular to build foundations upon.
That's an older home.
Yeah, and
But the
of course,
lot also
yeah, and
sloped up.
if you think about the topography of Dallas, like it's not, giant mountains and hills that are exaggerated slopes, but it's a very gentle slope so that, water runs off in one way or another into its respective watershed. So, our streets are, about sloped like this, it's not this, and it's not completely flat. Like you obviously want a flat foundation when you're building a new house or whatever. So, they're always going to level out, the building pad usually and do a slab on grade foundation where they, dig a trench to pour the beams and do all that stuff. So yeah, this one is showing just a pier and beam foundation, probably like early 1920s. On that photo, this one.
The yard is elevated a foot or two as well.
And is it typical that in the older construction that they would essentially, and I'm using this very generally, but they would go down for the street so that the houses had more prominence, and that was very common in our older construction?
So it had a architectural appearance
Right.
function to it. Okay.
And so that was part of, I think, many of our older neighborhoods have this type of roll steps that go up to a yard, a slight grade up, and then the houses, again, with the pier and beam, can be anywhere from 1824,
Yeah.
sometimes a little bit more.
Okay.
And also take into account grade.
Yeah, and the principles of SEPTED, which is crime prevention for urban environmental design, I think.
Yes.
What that stands for. It really promotes the idea that for private residences that it has your eyes are higher than the street, so it's better, you feel more safe, and people walking on the street feel safer, that people are watching what's going on the street, and it does encourage more safety and just the design of the building. So these exterior beam houses are lovely, you know, I think I like them. But, yeah, they have, their finished floor is elevated, you gotta walk up to the porch, and then you get into the home, and you know, and like, someone who doesn't belong at the home, you know, really kind of has to ask themselves, do I really want to be here a few times before they.
So what about the next photo? And I'm sorry to slow this down.
No, it's part of why we're here. And I took the other one, so I will do that. It's one I'm familiar with. It's near Turtle Creek, so there is some natural topography, and it will eventually catch up on screen for you. And so it is, you know, it's a corner lot which was sloping away. It is the older development pattern, so it had some natural elevation. And then if you go to the two corners, it's essentially at grade at on this plan, what is that, the lower right. And then as you go up, and this is where you start to see, they've got a half level below, which is the parking, and then obviously the steps going up, which I think is very consistent with Miss May's, which was the next one.
And also on this one, if you notice it, you know, you can see the grass kind of building up to the corner of the building,
Right. Which is
since our current definition is you average the highest and lowest exterior corners of the structure. You know, you don't capture that little hill on the outside of the thing.
Right.
So the proposed amendments would capture that little hill that right to the corner. Another.
And we also see this building also has an underground, mostly underground garage.
Yeah. Okay. Parking.
And then for the next one,
So the land there slopes, definitely. Appears to me, okay.
it does, you can see on the kind of far right, there's a retaining wall between
Yes.
the family structure and the adjacent property. And I think probably, I mean, very, very, very basic initial is you want to keep water out of the house.
Yeah.
So you need to slide
Drainage,
away.
drainage.
And we have a drainage manual. I haven't read it in detail, but typically, you know, residential lot will be graded. Highest point will be foundation of the structure. You grade towards the lot lines because you're not typically allowed to allow water to drain to an adjacent property. So you're going to grade your site to drain the water around the home, around the foundation, to the sides, and then to the front, to the street, or if there's an alley, you can split and drain some to the alleyway and some to the street. Because typically the requirement is your water has to go to the right. It cannot go to your neighbors. So that's kind of like very, very step 1A.
So drainage issues, architectural appearance, and also parking. Okay. Thank you.
So back to grade. So again, restructuring the zoning definition of grade to line us with the building code. That should simplify things. And then on item C, to make it clear that each structure phase or ground story finished floor, you measure height, not across an entire building site, but for each individual structure. That should solve for any, you know, very uneven sites. So on item 8, so we take the definition of basement. So basement is any level, any story of a building that has more than one half of the vertical distance, more than half the height is below grade. It's a basement, and we don't include, and this is already the case, correct? But we don't count a basement as a story for determining maximum story height.
Well, it doesn't say right now, so we do. Except for informed visitors where it says we don't have to. So it's really just a cleanup to be like, yes, let's not add basement.
And then again, 37.1 is just to, like I said before, we took out finished ground surface elevation and made it its own definition. Other than that, it's unchanged. And a new definition for ground story. So that's excluding a basement, ground story is any story of the building with the lowest finished floor. And then getting into the kind of more what we're really here to talk about is height. So we have, when we talk about height, we're talking about kind of the low point for measuring height and the high point for measuring height. So under the proposed amendments, we would start at the low point of measuring height would be either the finished floor of the ground story, when that finished floor is within 18 inches of grade, or 18 inches or less above grade. But then if the structure is built up, if the finished floor is higher than 18 inches above grade, more than 18 inches above grade, then we measure from grade. So this is going to control for the last time we talked about what if I wanted to build a house on stilts and measure from finished floor, then I can build a Galveston stilt house. So obviously if that's more than 18 inches above grade, we don't need to do that. We need to measure from grade. And then simplifying the top point of measurement. In my original proposal, I had all these definitions of gable and hip and gambrel roofs and all these different things. When essentially Sarah, I think wisely, decided to simplify what I wrote and get us to a point where essentially we have a pitched roof with a 1 to 6 rise over run pitch or greater, then you measure height to the midpoint of that vertical dimension. Anything else, if you have a dome, then we measure to the midpoint of the dome. And for any other structure, whether it be what we call a shed roof or a flat roof, measure to the highest point. So essentially, instead of having 6 or 7 different ways of thinking about height, basically broken down into 3. You either are a 1 to 6 or greater pitched roof, you're a dome roof, or you're a flat roof, an all other roof, which is shorthand I would call flat. And then
Model.
Yeah, if it's not a building, there's no finished floor, then you measure from grade. So these are included in the case report. These are the same images we've shown before. This is just showing, illustrating how under the current definition of height, you would measure according to A, or building A and building B, you would consider to be the same height, even though clearly there's a very large difference. And then under the proposal, you would basically changing how height is measured, you would get these structures to actually be the same overall height and measured the same, instead of getting this kind of advantage from having an uneven.
How is that on the left?
So currently, the midpoint is from the highest ridge to the lowest E. And then under the proposal, its proposed definition is highest point to the highest.
Okay.
So currently, you could quote unquote game the system by dropping your lowest E really close to the ground, and then that pulls where we measure height at down to that midpoint. And then just kind of as an example, I don't have an image for this, but if we look at building A under the proposal, if we just lopped off the right half of building A and said that there's no slope on the right side, then you would measure to the highest point. Because that would be a pitched roof with fewer than one sloping side connected to an E, or however we defined it. You would then measure that to the very top. There'd be no midpoint. So that is.
And I guess another way of saying that is, there has been an argument made in the past that a shed roof, which would be just your one
Single slope.
a single slope, but it's got a significant ditch to it, it's just half of a gable. So midpoint, half of the gable. So, the proposed definitions add that it has to have the highest ridge, the midpoint between the highest ridge and the highest connecting eave when the roof has a minimum of 2 connecting eaves on each side of the ridge. It's just a lot of words to make sure that it has some sort of triangular formation. Right. Okay.
For our
Yeah.
slides to catch up.
So for those online, you have lots of time to read while we're waiting for our presentation.
So moving on to section 4.408, this is the actual maximum building height provisions. So all the actual maximum building heights are contained in district regs. So in this section, we're really talking about how to apply those maximum, how to measure. So in subsection 2, these are the exception, or these are structures that are allowed to project up to 12 feet above maximum structure height. So we've added a little bit of clarity and kind of additional standards to Romanet 2, mechanical equipment room. And we have kind of taken out in subsection 2, paragraph 2, we've taken out the limited to 36 feet in height or less, mainly just because you already have a maximum structure height that's higher than 36 feet. The projection of these items up to 12 feet above that it's not going to make that much of an impact because you already have a higher building height limit.
Or if we would allow them in R75 in the MF2 districts, why can't we allow it in the CR district or MU district?
And
Brings a lot of-
RPS does apply to this. So.
Right.
And so then one point of I think we'll have some discussion on is the mechanical room. The cumulative area projection. There's been a lot of discussion on the amount of projection that should be allowed there. I think there'll be some discussion on that. And then we're also proposing that when these mechanical equipment rooms and rooftop access structures are projecting up to 12 feet above the maximum structure height, that there also needs to be an additional setback, one foot to 1 foot setback from the facade of that structure. So your mechanical equipment room can't be 12 feet higher than the structure right on the side of the structure. It's going to have to be at least 12 feet back. It's 12 feet tall. And that's from every facade. Street facing. I'm sorry, from every street facing facade. So it would have to be located towards the rear of the property. And then also that the mechanical equipment rooms would also have to comply with any RPS that is limiting height on that structure. We've replaced clear story with lightning rods, small satellite dishes, weather vanes. I think we need small vanes and similar equipment. We'll make sure to correct that. And then we've added a little bit of kind of clarity to the parapet walls, maybe 4 feet above maximum structure height.
Yes.
Mr. McGregor has a question.
And I apologize, I cannot see folks online, so feel free to unmute and speak up. Mr. McGregor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Dawes, I want some clarification on your slide number 10, if you would please go back to that. Okay, so here, under basement, I noticed that we changed the word level to story. My recollection is that elsewhere in the code, level is defined as, of course, any of the levels in the building, and the basement would be considered a level, but the way story is defined, stories are only those levels above ground. So I just want to make sure that, or bring this to your attention to verify that we're not creating a contradiction here with the definition of story somewhere else in the code.
Okay. So we don't have level defined in our development code. We only have story defined. So that was the reason why that minor change was proposed.
Okay,
Because,
okay,
we were thinking about a basement, it would be a story, not necessarily a level, since we don't really know what a level is in our code.
okay, okay. All right, yes, so yeah, I do. I didn't realize the level was not defined, so that's good. You've already looked at it, so thank you.
Question. And then follow up from Mr. Hall.
Do I understand building height is measured from the street? If you're looking at the building from the street?
So the proposal would be, a three-dimensional measurement. So it would be like you're looking at plan view at the site plan and finding the highest and lowest elevations, either, for the proposed, it's going to be typically within 6 feet of the building. So the highest and lowest points within 6 feet of the building, which might be at the structure, if it's all kind of put on a hill. So highest and lowest, and then you find that horizontal plane, that's the average of those 2 points, and then you start to measure from there. So it is not respective of where the street is.
Street, alley, so you got a street, house, alley, house, street. So you're saying a house, building height, the house was designed like this, it got taller as it went farther back towards the alley.
It would still, so it would just be, I don't know how to explain it. You have any-
It's gonna be the overall, like, what's the highest point of the structure, wherever it is.
Which could be in
I mean, the back, the front, the middle, it could be wherever. It's all about just the one highest point. If it's 36 feet, that's it. Don't care where it is. And how is that related to the average of the highest and lowest point within 6 feet of the footprint of the structure, wherever that is? Because when you establish your grade, it's a plane. So you just take that average and pretend that is the height, that is the
That's a
lowest
starting
point of the entire lot. So it's just wherever the highest point is in relation to that, correct to that plan.
And is that bringing in line with how the International Building Code defines grade? Is that correct? That's correct.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that is, I'm pretty sure yesterday on it's a Preston Hollow just to the east of Preston Road, somewhere near Deloach. Out walking, for the first time I noticed this house just seemed to get taller and taller as it got further back on the lot, and I just thought, that's a massive, huge structure. So that's why I'm asking, because it appeared to me it was much taller as it went back towards the alley. And then how you would measure building height.
There are some cities, and I'm not recommending this, that the way that they measure height or think about height is go stand in the middle of the street, assume you're a 6 foot tall man, so you go 5'6", and you do a slope from that point, and that's the maximum height, 1 to 3 or 1 to 6 or whatever. And so your maximum height does that. It changes as you get further away because the thinking is it's all about what I'm seeing.
And we have that in some like neighborhood stabilization overlays and things like that.
And
But just basic zoning, it's just a grade or 18 inches if you're finished floor or whatever. And then you find your top. So, maybe on Deloach that maybe it's in a conservation district, I think they are considering that.
They're large lots, especially east of Preston.
And it could just be something the property owner wanted,
And so, but in that example, again, you would set the grade plane again. Graded views and what's proposed. And then presumably it has a sloped roof. If it's greater than 1 to 6 and has 2 eaves, you go to the midpoint of that roof. And then R75 would be a maximum of 30 feet. And so you go from your grade plane, you go to the midpoint of the roof. That would be maximum of 30. But then the ridge could be above that, but that's how height would be measured. Is that correct?
That's
I'll have to take a photograph to see if it's good.
We can have it evaluated.
No, I'm just curious.
No, but again, and that's partly, I think many of us have been driving around looking at examples and trying to
Yeah.
understand, so it's a great question.
On that note, are
Any,
there
yep,
conservation districts or PDs or other places where this definition of height would also need to be changed or more affected by this?
Well, when a PD or conservation district has their own definition of how to measure height, the proposal won't change how that specialized zoning has modified height measurement. So this wouldn't have any effect on those, but if they are silent on it and it just refers to the 51A definition, that this would apply.
this definition generally, I think we're bringing clarity.
Yeah.
Or again, that's my word, but is that the intent? We're not fundamentally altering how we're calculating grade. We're trying to help inform what building inspection is seeing, how it's being submitted and how projects are being considered. And then again, looking at it relative to also what building code may require so that there's more consistency. Is that
Exactly.
fair?
Yeah, it's making more common sense and have it make more sense at the end, more words, but hopefully it's more what people would expect it to mean and say.
All right. I'm going to pause since we're having a good discussion. Any other questions from our folks online? Mr. Berry?
Thank you. Take my virtual hand down.
Thank you, because I can tell
There
you,
we
it
go.
does not flip on the screen here, so.
Oh, okay. Great work. This is very detailed. I just had a couple of questions about the proposed amendment language. On, I believe it's page 7, the definition of grade. I was reviewing some IBC code commentary and they had some visuals for that. And number 45 grade says means the average of highest and lowest point of the finished ground surface elevation. So is that if you've got a building that's, steps in and out, it's got like 10 or 12 total sides, IBC gives an example of, you take segments of the elevation, for example, and measure the average of those segments. Is that, y'all had talked about aligning it with the IBC. Is it, sounds like this is maybe more simplified if it's
It is.
over an entire elevation. Can you explain a little bit more on that?
Yes, so I also read some of those extra credit readings, and I agree. It was a lot of calculations on some of those guidance materials because the way the IBC seems to measure it is it's like an area average. So it's like it doesn't specify you need to take 10 measurements per facade or 100 or 3. It's just an unspecified amount of measurements, and you find this average. And I thought it would be more less debate and a negligible difference if we just took the highest and lowest points. So that's why 45 in the skeleton part of it says highest and lowest points. So it will not be an average of the facade grades, if you will. It would just be the highest and lowest points within the 6 foot of the building footprint.
Okay, so it's of the whole building because it says finished ground surface elevation. Is that per elevation or for the whole building?
For the whole building. unless it's multiple structures or additions and things like that. If you read C,
Uneven
that
grounds.
yeah, or an uneven ground story, finished floor level. And I think Commissioner Hampton has some good edits that we can incorporate to make that a little more clear. But yeah, so it would be around the whole footprint, not per facade.
Okay. And then my next question is on the next page for height, page 8. How did y'all arrive at the 18 inches? I'm thinking of stoops here, right? If you've got, I don't know,
Yeah.
3 or 4 steps. Yeah.
So I mean, it's negotiable, but I was talking to our conservation district chief, and I said, so what would you normally expect like the low side of a piering beam foundation to be? And he said, oh, about 18 inches minimum. And so he was like, it could be 4 or 5 feet, on the low side, or like, on the downside. And I was like, yeah, I don't think we're gonna get 4 or 5 feet, but maybe we can go for 18 inches. So that's where I came up with the 18 inches.
And
Okay.
if I may, Mr. Berry, and Ms. May, does the next item B actually anticipate where it is greater than? And I don't know if that answers
Right.
your question, Mr. Berry, or not, but that was, I think, where that got split, was trying to acknowledge where we do have, I'm gonna call them nominally flat lots versus those that either have some topography or intend to have, that presence for the project. So we certainly didn't want to preclude that type of that, but Ms. May, is that correct? Was
Yes,
that the
that's correct.
discussion?
Yeah, we definitely wanted to get like an upper limit that was reasonable on that 18 inches of flexibility, and to help people, encourage people to take account of the topography rather than just
Right. Great. So,
Take a big
sorry, Mr. Berry, just wanted to give some clarity if that was helpful.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's very helpful. And yeah, that makes sense. Speaking with the conservation districts on that. I guess my last comment, it's really a comment, was on the max building height, the next section, 408. You already kind of addressed this, but the number to be determined there for the mechanical equipment, I think certainly make it inclusive of like stair enclosures. So I would suggest 200 probably. To most of them are around 140 to 170. But I think you had mentioned previously a range of maybe 100 to 200. And I just wanted to make a suggestion there.
Thank you. I think we're going to have more conversation about that as well. Or we may want to have it. Did you want to go through the rest of your presentation? I
Well,
think
the next slide is actually
there we go.
stairwell. So I think
There you go.
if you think it's appropriate.
Yeah, and this is really, I had similar questions, Mr. Bering. I was trying to make sure that we weren't being too restrictive, yet also not allow essentially another story, which I don't think was the intent of this provision. And so when I went, I think the 200 came about trying to take this example and translate it into what a potential square footage, and then perhaps leave some flexibility. We were trying to, I think, in visiting with Ms. May, and Ms. May, please jump in. What is building inspection C? What is coming through? And then, as we've done on a number of these, we went back and looked at the IBC definition, which limits rooftop structures to 1/3 of the roof area. And that's my condensed version of what it states. And I think maybe to provide flexibility, but maintain consistency, one suggestion for this body may be to utilize that as the standard in lieu of trying to define a square footage that I don't know that we've got enough data to really tell us what that appropriate square footage would be for all cases. And opening that up for discussion. And Ms. May, if you want to add any, or Mr. Doss, any context to that?
I am supportive of changing that just square foot maximum of XX square feet when designed for individual dwelling units, of changing that to 1/3 of the roof area the will of the committee. I think it's a good.
Is it correct that the other items that are proposed in here, for instance, the elevator penthouse, that's going to be the overrun? That would not be an elevator serving that floor area, which would be separate structures, separately calculated. Is that correct?
Well, whatever it does happen to be, it would be limited to 12 feet above the maximum structure height, whatever that may be.
Okay. Because I think we all, cooling towers, tanks to hold liquids, ornamental cupolas, I think we could understand what those are. But as we're considering what this square footage might be, again, I think in the plan that we had, it seemed to indicate it's access to the roof. And I think we're seeing those being utilized as a terrace for multifamily projects, and larger buildings. I think they're being utilized as amenities. And to make sure that again doesn't become another story, because this is an exception that is being utilized. But is that something that you're seeing coming through building inspection? Could you just speak to how you all evaluate that or have?
I think currently the way it's written, without any changes, it probably like the doors of the elevator and the mechanical equipment above the elevator would be allowed to exceed the maximum structure height of no more than 12 feet, for the existing definition. But the way we've written mechanical equipment room and added and rooftop access structures, it would probably capture the actual elevator doors to be part of Romanet 2 instead of Romanet 1. And so the elevator doors part of it would need to comply with the rest of Romanet.
So Romanet 1 would be the equipment. Romanet 2 would be if you used it to access the roof.
Right.
Okay.
But in no case could the 12 feet is still the ultimate maximum total stacked on top of it.
And then I'm trying to do my math in my head. Have you seen elevators that, including their overruns greater than 12 feet?
I think probably no, but the way it's written that it's 12 feet above the maximum structure height. So if the roof deck is below the maximum structure height, you get that area between the max height plus 12 feet. So
I think it's generally higher than that, but I don't want to get into building specifics. So just wanted to have that conversation.
Because you've got your cabin and you've got your elevator, all the equipment on top, it's not more than 12 feet.
So I think when we have seen that in reality, it's just the roof deck is lower than the maximum structure height.
So, Mr. Beering, Mr. Reeves, Mr. McGregor, I can't see you all, so just opening that up. Okay.
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, as amazing as it sounds, I'm good. Staff has answered all the questions I had, so thank you.
All right, so Mr. Doss.
We got to 1/3, right?
Yes.
think so.
Okay, good. We'll move on.
I think you read that little paragraph. That pop up on the wall. It's just like that next slide.
Okay, so this is the note.
Yes.
So there's this, we have,
Maybe you should have gone on the next slide.
maybe, I don't know. So in preparation for, there's a note in one of the next slides that we are proposing to delete that basically the note creates a conflict with district regulations that limit, that allow projections above RPS. So in light of getting ahead of deleting that note, I'm going to read section E because this is from
I think it's for CR.
CR. So this is a very typical, this is basically in every zoning district, this pop-up box on the left of your screen, height is included. So the residence proximity. So if any structure of a portion is over 26 feet in height, that portion may not be located above a residence proximity slope. And then there's an exception, except for chimneys. So chimneys are limited by RPS, but structures listed in 51A-4.408A2, which is these, yeah, that's what you're looking at. Thank you. may project through the slope to a height not to exceed the maximum structure height or 12 feet above the slope, whichever is less. Chimneys may project through the slope to a height of 12 feet above the slope and 12 feet above the maximum structure height. And then each in Romanet 2 there is the district specific overall maximum structure height. So this section specifically, this section exists in every zoning district, and it allows these items in section 2 that we're looking at to exceed RPS. But then we get to this note that says, no, wait, they can't exceed RPS. So in practice, we follow the district regs that allow those things to project above RPS. And this note is just sitting there floating, conflicting with that. So that's why we're proposing to just delete this note to bring the code in line with practice, because those district regs always, they're more specific. Those are always going to typically always control this general discussion of. So that was the explanation for deleting out this note. And then paragraph 4, this is essentially the pitched roof can project up to 12 feet above maximum structure height. So that's kind of item B there is kind of combining you measure height to the midpoint, but then you can't have a super steep pitched roof that goes another 20 feet and say, well, that's my midpoint, I'm still under maximum structure height. The ridge of that pitched roof can only go up to 12 feet above maximum structure height. And then just looking at the districts that was allowed to happen in was kind of limiting, and pitched roofs and dormers exist in many other zoning districts than just these ones that are listed. So proposal is to apply A and B to all zoning districts, not just the short list there. And then we have a couple of just clarifying simplification items. Section 4.412, residential proximity slope. You can see highlighted 1 and 2 there. So item 1, the language of vertical plane extending through the boundary line in discussions with building inspections is just kind of confusing. And if you just say the boundary line at the site of origination, you get to the same place. So that's just some simplification. And then item 2, paragraph 2, because now grade is not always where you measure height from. You measure height either from grade or from the finished floor of the ground story. We have to revise this section to say wherever the beginning point of height measurement is where you start thinking about RPS. So we have to make that change if the other changes happen, because where grade is measured is not always where height is.
So clarification on that though, with the item we're talking about with the 0 to 18 inches, would that potentially give an additional 18 inches in height and not violate RPS as?
Right. Yes, it would. But I think we also skipped the clear story definition and that change.
Yeah, we do need to go back to that.
Yeah, so we are proposing a little bit of tweaking in the things that are allowed to exceed RPS. But the long story short is it would be really risky and confusing for us to measure height one way for like maximum structure height, and then measure RPS in a completely different way when that's just a variety of a height measurement. So to make those different, I feel opens it up for a lot of mistakes and frustration. And so it's really just to keep it aligned with the proposed definition rather than, you're gonna get a lot of, you can't really do a whole lot with it, but it's just a little bit of flexibility. And definitely keep talking about that. But I think maybe when we were trying to explain the whole note thing, skipped over the
Thanks.
clear stuff.
I'm gonna let you talk about
You want me to talk about it?
because I don't.
Okay.
Besides,
There's additional clarification back one section.
So let's see. Okay, so clear stories is a current exception to that maximum structure height in our code. You know, so clear stories currently can exceed the maximum structure height by 12 feet, which is also applicable to RBS. They can also exceed RBS by 12 feet. But the traditional sense of a clear story has not, it's evolved in building construction in Dallas, and clear story, instead of meaning like this, you know, like Notre Dame, like clear story on a church, you know, it's just some extra set of windows up at the top of your structure. And they normally wind up on the exterior facade, and it gives the impression that this building is very tall because those clear story windows are above the maximum structure height, up to 12 feet above the maximum structure height. So I'm just proposing maybe we close that loop, and if there's a real like hardship that a clear story should exceed maximum structure height, maybe that would be a board of adjustment consideration rather than something that's allowed everywhere. And
Up to 12 feet.
Yes, up to 12 feet above the maximum structure height and RBS. So it's just a proposal. And replacing it with these other lightning rods, weather vanes, stuff. Why not? If we have a paragraph, you know.
Are these clear story windows simply windows added onto like a parapet, or is it actually like has an interior area where there's light coming in?
I think actually you have a photo of it. Yeah, so.
I'm curious what exactly.
So if you look at the elevation on the screen, if you see those top windows at the very top, that would be the clear story that's allowed to go above RDS and above maximum structure height, 12 feet. So so where our maximum structure height should be between that short and tall window, they're given that extra bump for a clear story. There's no floor or ceiling between those top two sets of windows. It's really just.
if those windows weren't there, they wouldn't be allowed.
So essentially, because there are windows there, they're allowed to have an extra 12 feet on that top story. Oh, that's fascinating.
So does that change the roof pitch? Because they have the clear story, so can they then have a clear story and then a pitched roof? Which
Right.
then actually gives them more height?
Yes.
So what you're proposing is to take the clear story out, so that if you have anything above it, it has to be either functional or a roof.
Right, so take out the loophole of the clear story as shown in the example, so that the facade and the structure is more true to the maximum structure height or RPS, whichever's more restrictive.
Yeah, so in this case, the windows marked H are the clear story windows. If those windows did not exist, the building would have to be shorter down to the bottom of those windows marked H. But because they put windows there, it's a clear story and they get to build taller.
So, but doesn't that impact the RPS if you have something behind it that the clear story brings it up, pierces the RPS, then doesn't it still make it illegal?
They're allowed to exceed RPS today because it's included in the exceptions.
Oh.
The way it's written.
Because the way it's written, the clear story, because it's not a functional group, it's not a functional story. It does not, RPS does not apply.
Correct. Well, yeah, it's not restricted.
It's not restricted by RPS.
It's limited to 12 feet above RPS.
So this can actually be 12 feet above, but it still inhibits someone else's ability. It inhibits the functionality that the RPS is supposed to provide. So RPS is supposed to provide functionality for the smaller story. So a next building can't pierce its RPS. Can't tower over something, but this allows because the clear story doesn't have that functionality, it can pierce the RPS and I can lose the functionality of the RPS protection.
Well, I would say that RPS is supposed to have an appropriate scale of development next to low density residential to make it, shorter than what the maximum structure height would allow, as it gets further away from low density residential. Okay. And probably the purpose of the clear story is, I wish I probably should have recommended another example of clear story, but it's usually on if you think of like a pitched roof that's kind of like this, the clear story would be like these windows at the ridge. And, people aren't supposed to be looking out of a clear story and, using a clear, and, they wouldn't be looking out of this example, but it's just evolved to this, let's put it at the exterior of the building and wow, that looks really tall now. Yeah. So.
Got it.
In my technical terms, this is called punking the system.
Well, in my experience,
I like that.
windows add extra light and air to the space. It can really make it feel much bigger than it is. There's 3 windows in our tiny house, and it feels much bigger than 399 square feet because the ceiling's so high. We've got that extra light and air coming in. So under certain circumstances, it can be very useful. But this is probably not an example of that, unless you've got a penthouse or a ballroom on the top floor, in which case clear story windows could add a lot of value. So great.
I have a question, if I may, Chair.
Yes.
About measuring RPS from a unimproved property. So the site of origination, generally refers to the grade at the property line. Is this changing anything, the definition, and how site of origination is measured relative to just a piece of land, like our zoned land?
The short answer is no. So the site of origination is one of those, say, an R75 zoning district, a property line in an R75 zoning district. The grade of the residential property doesn't matter. The only grade that matters is the building that's height is being restricted by RPS. The only thing that matters on the residential property is how far away it is / the actual property line and the vertical plane that extends through the property line, because the bottom point of where RPS starts is always the grade of the restricted building extended to the property line of the residential property.
But it's the property
Well,
line.
that's not been my experience, I guess. We've always instructed our surveyors to get the grade of the perimeter of the adjacent property. But you're saying it's just a straight line across, regardless of grade of the site of origination?
Right. So number 1 is the horizontal distance you measure to the site of origination. The point at which you start to measure height for RPS is number 2. So when it has the words the vertical plane extending through the, that's just like, wow, that's a lot of extra words, and it confuses people to think that the grade of the site of origination has any value in calculation of RPS, because it does not. It's just saying your horizontal distance is at your site of origination. Now, your height is measured from the grade of the restricted building or site. So it's just, it wasn't written really clearly, and it's always been this difficult concept, I think, for people to understand. But it's just the edit on number 1 is really just to take out confusing words that muddy the waters, because you don't really have to think of the property line as a vertical plane, when really it's a horizontal distance you're measuring to. You know, you're measuring from the building to your site of origination. That's like a horizontal distance, not necessarily your vertical plane. It's just extra confusing.
Well, but it fundamentally starts at the property line, the site of the origination. And whether we say it's a line or it's a vertical plane, but it's that is where you start to then, as you say, it's when you measure horizontal distance, right? Then from gray plane, as we're now suggesting it, and then measuring up, and then but you've taken your angle across from that point. Mr. Barry, does that follow up?
So whether the site of origination is lower or higher than the subject property is irrelevant?
That's correct.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't matter if your site of origination is lower or higher than your subject site. It's just a height restriction on the subject site, regardless of where your site of origination grade is.
I'm sure that I've followed the elimination of vertical plane, but I'll come back to that maybe. Are there other questions? I have a few that I'm going to go through, but Mr. Reeves or Mr. McGregor?
I do not have anything.
Okay. So I wanted to circle back on the question of, I'm going to start with what I think hopefully is the easier one on the structures, where we talk about measuring height in the 1 to 6 slope. And I think you generally covered this, but just want to make sure I'm clear, is that, and this is on page 8 of 12 in the case report, 47A2, 8A, structure with a pitched roof, the midpoint of the vertical dimension between the highest ridge and the highest connecting eave, with a minimum of 2 connecting eaves each side, and a ridge, and a minimum roof pitch of 1 to 6. So 1 to 6 is what's generally considered, I'm just going to call it the slope roof. And so, but it's anything 1 to 6 or greater and it requires a ridge and 2 slopes. So for instance, a shed roof would not be covered in that traditional definition because there's not a ridge and 2 connecting eaves. Okay. And so then BD, a structure with a dome roof, midpoint of the vertical dimension, I think that's clear. CC for any other structure. So a number of the other reference examples specifically reference flat roofs, and we have not included that. Is there any benefit, or should there be any consideration of including whether it's flat roof or shed roofs or any other structure? Are those needed just to help give further clarity?
I think so. I mean, we've always operated for any other structure to be applicable to flat roofs and, you know, things that aren't. It's just that the original definition included gable, hip, or gambrel roof. And so because it was a architectural term without clear parameters, that's where we had always struggled.
Okay.
Finding shed roofs.
So I'm going to throw the other one out there because it's my roof type. How would a mansard be considered within this definition?
I think a mansard would be any other structure. Unless you can argue that mansard is the, has.
2 slopes and flat on top.
Oh, it's flat on
Or,
top.
it's
Okay.
sloped all the way around.
Yeah.
So you have eaves, you have slope. Slope is greater than 1 to 6, but it's flat in the middle.
Yeah, so I think we would go to the top. Pyramids.
And again, just trying to, and I will say, I also have a gambrel roof in my neighborhood, so familiar with that. So anybody else have questions on the roof types or any clarifications needed on that? Okay, so that was one. So on the removing of the note, I'm going to move to building height, and I had 2 questions on that. So I think I follow in that the note that is included, and this is just, it's the note that's below, I think it's item 2 on page 9.12 of our case report. So the conflict is that typically all the other districts that are, I guess, greater than 36 feet have exceptions that allow the full list. And so is there any indication of why this note was added originally? I'm always hesitant to take something out when there seems like there was a clear intent on why it was added.
Right. I didn't do any research into when it was added or appeared. I don't think it could be the right season.
Okay, so we've just noted that and how it's essentially being presented now for building inspection because there's the exceptions and most, if not all, of the other districts where this would apply, that it's not being utilized as it was perhaps intended.
Yeah, and it does say, just to read it in full, the heights allowed in subsection A2, which includes our clear story and our rooftop stuff, are subject to any RPS height restrictions that may be contained in the district regulations for a particular district. And see Division 51A 4.1, which is that section that we were reading on the slide that said A2 is exempt from RPS. So it says A2 is exempt in the district regulations, and then you read A2, and then you find this note, and then the note says they're subject to RPS that is contained in the district regulations. You know, so it's just like this circular reference that, you know, it hasn't really, I mean, like the ultimate interpretation of it, since I've been working here for almost 16 years, is these things are allowed above RPS. That they're exempt from RPS. So it's just, you know, deleting that circular reference.
Still a little hesitant on that one, but I'm going to move. So then I just wanted to circle back on our discussion about the areas. This is 8.12 of our case report, maximum building height, A2A Romanet 2AA. So the mechanical equipment room and rooftop access structures. So these would be the maximum 12 feet above maximum structure height. And so I think where the discussion got to was to say that the cumulative area of projection is a maximum of 1/3 of the roof area. I'm opening that up for discussion. I think that's where the discussion landed, but wanted to make sure that made sense to everyone in lieu of trying to define the square footage. Okay, seeing no hands, okay. Talk about roofs. So then final question, and this was again a discussion point, page 7.12 or 7 to 12 in our case report under grade. So 2.10245 grade, item C. So as this is written, it's not clear to me that the provisions of A and B would necessarily apply. So is there any thought, or as the staff was evaluating this, we're saying, I think if I remember the discussion, we were talking about multiple structures or projects in phases. We're thinking of the really large lots that had, you know, they're built over multi-year projects. But it's not really telling them how you then get to determining grade. So would they need to be subject to A and B that essentially then tells them how they calculate, that if your site is sloping up, that you're going to go at your finished ground surface elevation?
Right, so I think that C, I just didn't know how to express it, but it's like the second sentence of that first part of 45.
Okay.
I think that's a structure thing. So A and B apply to everything,
Yeah,
and C is just,
If you have multiple sites.
yeah.
yeah.
It's like-
We'll
and also, by the way.
we'll make sure to give a CAO and structure that correctly to make sure that A and B apply to a C situation.
Right, so C effectively would become part of grade, if you will.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And then I guess with that, it would then clarify that you would measure either to the lot line, to the building, and then go back to height and then measure your height. Okay. All right. So. So I think my final question, and this is a two-parter. So on the definition of height, for the proposed language is for the finished floor ground story 18 inches or less versus the application of RPS, because RPS is suggested to change to height versus grade. Again, this question about, are we giving an additional 18 inches? And I think maybe what I heard you say is that we're closing some loopholes, and this is a way to give some flexibility to sites. But is it counter to the intent of what RPS is intending to provide, if that makes sense? And that's where I'm struggling a little bit to understand, if that, should this 18 inches be subject to RPS? And I'm not sure how to phrase that differently.
Yeah.
So I don't know, is that something that staff evaluated? I guess as you evaluated, you felt like it was a good trade-off, if that's the right word.
Yeah. I do feel like it, to have one measurement of height, it would resolve a lot of conflict and confusion, especially like when we have neighbors questioning, the height of the proposed building and all these things. It would just resolve a lot of heartache, in the real world.
So I'm gonna open it up to the body of mine. Am I the only one with, trying to kind of work through how this might be applicable? I'm gonna say it sounds like yes. So, all right, well, are there any other questions or discussion? Okay, so I'm going to take a pass at trying to capture today's discussion. Let me know if folks have other comments that I have missed. And I'm going to do them by section, hopefully in order. So 2.102, 45C, which is the definition of grade. It's to combine item C within the grade definition to be subject to calculations per A and B. Is that clear for staff? Okay.
So wait a minute, are we gonna have to repeat what you said somewhere? And if so, do you have this written? No,
Yes.
you do. Okay, so I'm just trying to make sure we can do it once.
She'll send it to us for the minutes.
Okay, great.
Well, and I'll read it again if we need to. So that's the first item I have on grade. So 2.102, again, definitions 47 height. I actually don't think I ended up with anything there. Did anyone, so this question on the 18 inches, or shed flat or other structures. Last call for comments. Okay. Gonna pause there. All right, so then 4.408, item 2, capital A, Romanet 2, AA, under mechanical equipment, room, and rooftop access structures, revise AA to read, the cumulative area of projection is a maximum of 1/3 of the roof area. On the note, which is on page 9 of 12, I would suggest that we direct staff to evaluate that note in its original intent prior to eliminating from the current code. So essentially maintain it and confirm the intent. And then on 4.412, which is the residential proximity slope, on B1, I would say no change. And I say that because I'm not, while I understand staff's concern about the language, I don't see a lack of clarity there. And I'm concerned that by changing to a line, that we may be creating a conflict unintentionally. So I'm not clear on how that's providing any additional clarity.
But
Yes.
Mark, so the boundary line is already approved. Because the property line, whether I'm on the ground or 10 feet in the sky, is still the property.
So should it just simply be a vertical bound? Well, no, a line could be a vertical.
And that's why I think it's as Ms. May mentioned, it's extra language that I think was intended to clarify, but you're still having to clarify it. The boundary line is already,
Well,
it's already a two-dimensional.
yeah, it's kind of two parts. It's more just trying to write more like technical writing where you minimize the number of words you use so that, you know, you provide more clarity and the language that has the vertical line, it makes people think grade, you know, it confuses people basically. When you say the vertical plane, and so you think, oh, I gotta go measure the grade of the site of origination, when that's not what it's saying. It's just saying it's the vertical plane.
Starting point of the slope.
But the vertical measurement is based on the restricted building.
Right.
Yes. Yes, not on the site of origination. So when it says a vertical plane, people are thinking, oh, I start to measure, you know, I start the height measurement from my site of origination in the vertical sense. Whereas, no, like the opposite, horizontal sense.
Yeah. I guess I've never had that lack of clarity. So.
But I mean, leaving it the same is fine. You know, it's not like it's really gonna kill me one way or the other. It's just a suggestion to make it look clear.
And it won't change the application.
Right.
That's where. The suggestion, it will be the will of the body. And then, and this goes back, my two hesitation points that are in this are the changing height to grade, which is the next item on item 2. And then it's relative to the 18 inches. I'm going to listen to staff. I appreciate their analysis of this. I think we have addressed some loopholes and provided some additional protections. So we'll add the flexibility of 18 inches. So unless there's other thoughts, I think those would be then my four suggestions. Anybody else have other items they would like staff to evaluate?
I trust the architect's opinion in this room. So,
And I'm with Enrique.
I'm relying on Mr. Bering as well, so.
I've said everything I can say.
Okay,
And then at CPC, I trust Michael Young to put the
Oh,
legal
God,
mind to it.
I would say that I guess that I am with dismay on the vertical thing, because if it's understood, the boundary of a property goes up to infinity, that you are sort of saying something that's not necessary. But then I'm not architect, so I'm just assuming that's what you mean.
yeah, I don't see it defined anywhere though. And so I understand that's been the common understanding currently, but has that been, is it the common understanding because that language was there?
Should have brought me to it.
I'm happy to pull up anything you'd like to see. I've been consulting it during our discussion.
In Article 2 and 51A,
Yeah.
does it define property line, or does it describe it, maybe?
So, nope. We've got person, principal, arterial, private street, and quasi-public agency.
It doesn't say boundary line.
So these, nope. Block face, board, breezeway.
Does the IB, do you know if the IBC or IRC?
Okay.
But if you think about setback line, it's measured from the boundary line.
Right.
No
Yeah.
matter how tall your building is, you still can't go in
But
past
see-
your boundary.
I don't see boundary line being the common terminology.
Yeah.
Boundary
I would
line
say
is,
property line, I was right.
yeah,
Yeah,
We
And
can
that's-
change that.
we could change it to the
Property line.
property line. Like,
well, but I think boundary lines is likely intentional because there may not be
Things like building
It
sites.
cannot be a property. in your building.
building, right?
Building
It
on
could vary, right?
or it could be,
And it depends on where the building is placed on the property. But, you know, this is so,
Yeah, it's always.
I'm only here for decoration.
That is not true.
And either it's
Okay.
bad or good.
So-
Depending upon who's looking at it, right?
Anyone like me to restate the three items? Well, four. So, do we want this to come back to us? Do we feel like there's enough clarity for staff to move it to CPC? Do we want to see it one more time for final vetting?
I personally don't need to see it again, Madam Chair.
I'm so with you.
Okay, so,
Mr. Enrique. McGregor.
I'm sorry.
yes, Commissioner Blair is agreeing with you.
Okay,
Vice Chair Blair.
great.
I would add, I feel similarly, except for this boundary line conversation, primarily because I, as not an architect, have tried to read the code and interpret it, and have found similar things to be unnecessarily confusing, where it should be clear what a boundary line is, as we were just discussing. There's different ways you can think about the difference between a property line versus zoning characteristics, but a vertical plane extending through it, maybe there is somewhere else that definition should be added. So I'd like for staff to explore how that clarity might be specified somewhere else in the code maybe, and just tack that on to this code amendment that we're working on.
Well, and if that is your request, then, and I believe that if you feel that way, then someone else will feel that way. Then you answered the question, do we need staff to bring this back to us, and say yes? Because if they need to investigate it, research it, and then come back with a definitive. But I don't think that it should be a protracted time period for them, for that to happen. And it could be something that is as simple as a 20-minute rollout discussion added to something that we're already doing and not have to spend a whole day on it. If that makes sense to everybody.
That's
Yeah, I think there's only really two open questions at this point. One is confirm the note that is being proposed to be struck to make sure that we're not removing some intent that was there with the original language. And then two, clarify the boundary line vertical plane. Is there other language that would provide better clarity without simply striking? Because I hear line, I think one straight. I don't hear plane. And if that is the intent, then I would suggest we might, to Commissioner Poppins' point, there might be another way to resolve that. What is perceived as a confusion, and then bring more clarity to it.
I think Stephen had a great point. Do you want to?
I was gonna say, we could just leave it. If the committee feels that as written, it provides the clarity needed, we can just leave it. We don't need to go back to the committee. We can just go to CPC. Because ultimately, if the committee feels that it's clear enough as it is, adding a definition somewhere else, and then pushing this back by another CPC meeting, 2 weeks or a month, to get to the same point where we are today. If you're happy with it as it's written today, then why do that? Let's just leave it as it is.
And perhaps we could recommend approval today and revisit this issue if others at the commission feel like this needs clarity.
Yeah,
Are you okay with that?
Do you think it's clear?
I think it makes sense to strike the extra words because I think the boundary line is fairly clear, but in instances where the boundary line needs to be defined as a vertical plane, I think it's important to have that definition throughout the code rather than just in this tiny little area.
I think if we think about in terms of like setback lines, we never say anywhere that a setback line is a vertical plane that extends upwards from the boundary line, or 10 feet into the boundary line of the property. We don't ever say that, but you can't build your building up 50 feet and then go out into the setback, because it's understood that that setback line is a vertical line. It's not just on a piece of paper. And so I think that we don't say that anymore. We don't say that anymore.
Setbacks are noted specifically as being clear and unobstructed, which essentially means you can't project into, well, except for where we allow encroachments, which we then define.
So is this a special exception where this adds value to what we're defining here? This vertical plane extended?
My theory is that when they wrote RPS, it was a new concept that didn't exist, back originally when we were thinking about setbacks and those were all defined in chapter 1. And so it came, and maybe that's just how the discussion evolved and how it was being presented by members of, council or holdings. And it's just, that made sense at the time. But I think since I've been explaining RPS for almost 16 years, I always skip over the words, the vertical plane extending through when I explain it. I just automatically just cut that out because it starts to, they're hanging on to the words at the beginning and then it confuses them and then they stop and they get stuck in the mud and they don't understand that we're going to the property line or where the zoning district changes in the middle of the property and then doing a slope from there. I don't know. It's just the way I've always taught it. To skip over that.
Well, and I guess essentially, are there circumstances where that boundary line is a vertical plane that then begins a residential proximity slope? Does that really help clarify?
Well, wouldn't that be if you have underground?
Because it's still at, I mean, I think this goes back to Mr. Baring's point about grade. Because it is fundamentally, I mean, the plane does capture if there's variations in grade. If the site's sloping up and the property line's here, the property line follows that. And that's what, if you will, could be a vertical plane because it may vary But again, all it does in terms of RPS is it starts where the measurement, horizontal measurement begins, because then the vertical is over at whatever it's applicable to. I think that may be where the discussion about the vertical plate came in, is that it accounts for if there are variations where you're originating. But that's where it starts, and then you measure out and then up.
Again,
Yes, Mr. Berry.
apologize. Thank you. And just to comment on that, I understand it may be outside of our scope for this this consideration, but I do think that the grade of the site of origination should be considered. I understand that there are not many sites that this would apply to in Dallas, but imagine if you've got, you know, a building site 50 feet away from the site of origination, and there's a 10-foot drop, you know, between the two. What I'm understanding then is that this building site is then handicapped by a 10-foot reduction in their height due to the fact that the site of origination is measured from its grade and not from the residential grade. That makes sense.
Well, it does, but I would say the converse is also true, where you have a
Right.
site that's sloping away. They have, if you will, the benefit of the grade, in that they have additional height because they are sloping away.
Right.
We switch it. So right now, it's just a height limitation based on how far away you are from residential. It does not account for if your residential properties around you are higher or lower. It's just how far away are you? Okay, you're that far away, so you can have this much height in your building. Instead of, yeah, I don't want you to be uphill of me, or you can only be downhill. Yeah, it's how the proximity of that residential, it determines how much height that is allowed on the certain site.
And then I guess as y'all were talking, one question, the phrase beginning point in number 2, is that would generally refer to the grade plane, or that language seems a bit undefined?
Because now you either measure height from the grade, or if your finished floor is it's 18 inches or fewer higher than grade, you measure from finished floor. So your beginning point of height measurement is one of those, is either grade or finished floor. So now when you measure the height of your restricted building, it's going to be one of those 2 points. It's not always graded.
And if you look at the proposed amendments of 47A1, it says the measurement of height begins at. So that's where the beginning point. Okay.
Okay.
It picks up A and B, essentially. A and B, excuse me. Okay, so have we arrived at status quo on 4.412B1? Oh, I'm saying leave it as is.
I would be fine with leaving it as is and continuing the conversation.
Okay, so 4.412B1, no change. Last call, and then Mr. Baring, I'll make a note that we talk through this question on grade as well, if that's acceptable. All right, so I'm gonna defer to the body if we want to do a formal motion on this. And we've got one staff clarification. Yes, Ms. May.
So the motion was to not change the proposed or to not change the existing?
Not changing this,
Oh, okay. Collectively or just
No.
the one?
just B1.
Okay.
A, B1. No, sorry,
B.
not A, B1. 4.412, B1,
Leave that.
leave as existing. Okay, so I'll follow our typical protocol and ask if there's a motion on those 4 items.
Move as read into the record by Chair Hampton.
I'll send it.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Any
Like
further
it.
discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. We know you're gonna turn into CPC. So we have two other matters. First, approval of our meeting minutes from October 4th. Were there any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve?
I'll send.
Thank you,
I'll second.
Mr. Hall. Or
Popkin.
I send the.
Popkin motion, second by Mr. Hall. Thank you both. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, that's our adopted. So last item, consideration of our calendar. And so, Mr. Del Castillo, do you want to just run it through quickly? I understand it's our Tuesday meeting dates moving forward,
Yes.
week prior to CPC.
Yes, so I structured it based on Tuesdays before CBC, as we've been meeting during 2022. The only other kind of outliers is that we had July 4th, is a holiday, so we're not gonna meet that Tuesday. And it's just that we have a lot of Tuesdays in some of our months, so it looks like it's uneven, but it's really the Tuesday before CPC. CPC generally is the first Thursday, so the first preceding Tuesday normally comes in beginning some of these months. So it's just, that's the general rule, unless we're in a holiday.
See, we're meeting on Valentine's Day. Did anyone notice any conflicts?
It also, May 30th, it's the day after,
Memorial Day.
yes. That's a Monday holiday. It's a work day. Yeah.
So do we want to adopt today? Do we want to?
I have one question, if I may.
Yes.
So I understand because of July 4th weekend, we don't have that first meeting in July, but I think there's quite a bit of work coming up to ZOAC. Could we have a second meeting in July on a date that doesn't conflict with the 4th of July? Or should we, really, is a question for the group.
Yeah, and I will note, CPC has not adopted their calendar yet. And so this is quite likely to follow it. I guess with that in mind, Mr. McGregor, would June the 27th be an option? We currently only have one meeting in June and one meeting in July. That's what I was actually just running through. But I don't know how much folks have summer travel or other potential conflicts.
True. I guess it's really in part a question of how much work do we expect to be coming through ZOAC at that time, and whether we have to be necessarily tied into CPC's calendar, or just assuming that we have work meeting regardless of what CPC is.
Can I interject something? We also have the opportunity to add as necessary, call a special meeting. I don't see any reason why we can't adopt the calendar as is, with the understanding that any called meetings can be made, especially in the month of June and July, and or as needed, depending upon the work that comes in, which we also have. If we have nothing, we could cancel a meeting. Go figure that one out. So I don't see why we can't, because the calendar, although it is a set schedule, is not something that can't be altered.
Right.
We're never so rigid that we can't add or remove as necessary for this body training or anything else that may come up.
And
So I from where I sit, I can see us just adopting the meeting schedule as is, knowing that we can alter we can add or remove as necessary.
Right, okay.
And Madam Chair, I would say I totally defer to the three of you on CPC. If you like having these the week of CPC so that you can, get it all done in 1 week, so you can take the next week if you're traveling, or if you don't want it because it's too much in the same week. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow, much less, this far in advance. So I will totally defer to whatever you three want to do,
This is what we're talking.
or at least 2 out of 3.
I'm just waiting until we get a CPC calendar before we do this.
No, I'm fine to go ahead. I think it might be helpful for us to maybe have at least something that we're working towards. And then again, with CPC, we can always revisit it if we either identify a conflict or.
So then why don't we just adopt what we have and knowing that we can alter and revisit on any given day and time?
So if no one sees any obvious conflicts, I just kind of scrolled through my calendar. I didn't see anything. I thank you, Mr. Rees, for your consideration. I will tell you, CPC is taking advantage of having their Thursday mornings. So I don't know that we'll ever get that date back. So is there a motion to adopt the calendar as presented?
So move.
Okay, motion by Vice Chair Blair. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Popkin. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we have a calendar for 2023. So that is the end. Oh, and I didn't announce, but we did not have any registered speakers today. There's no one with us in attendance. So with that, we motion to adjourn. Mr. Hall, thank you. Commissioner Blair,
Yes.
Vice Chair Blair, thank you for your second. We are adjourned at 10:43 a.m. Thank you all. Enjoy
Thank
your
you.
lunch.